When Janet Phoenix Steele, the military's most lethal female sniper, is called out of retirement to train a skeptical all-male Navy SEAL team, she faces her greatest challenge yet. Deployed to the unforgiving Sahara Desert to eliminate a deadly terrorist cell betrayal from within leaves her team scattered and 3 men dead. Now with time running out and a massive attack on American soil imminent, Janet must rely on her legendary skills to pull off an impossible 3932-meter shot that will either save thousands of lives or cost her everything. This is the story of how one woman's courage, precision, and unbreakable spirit turned her from an outcast instructor into America's greatest hero. Like and subscribe to witness the most incredible sniper story ever told. Take the shot, Phoenix. Legendary female sniper returns to save America from ultimate terror plot. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Quantico training grounds as Janet Steele adjusted the scope on her Barrett M82A1. At 29, she possessed the kind of steady hands that had made her a legend in military circles, though few knew her real name. To most, she was simply Phoenix, the sniper who had risen from the ashes of impossible missions. The call had come 3 days earlier. General Richards, a man who rarely showed emotion, had sounded desperate. "We need you back, Phoenix. The country needs you back." Janet had been living quietly in Montana, teaching wilderness survival to teenagers and trying to forget the weight of 247 confirmed kills. Her small cabin overlooked a valley where elk grazed peacefully, a stark contrast to the chaos she had left behind. But when your country calls, some debts can never be ignored. Now she stood before 6 of America's most elite Navy SEALs men who had volunteered for an experimental counterterrorism sniper program. The briefing room fell silent as she entered her presence, commanding attention despite her modest 5'6" frame. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her green eyes held the kind of intensity that comes from staring death in the face and walking away. "Gentlemen," General Richards began, "meet your new instructor, Janet Steele, call sign Phoenix." The reaction was immediate and predictable. David Morrison, the team leader, crossed his arms and fixed her with a skeptical stare. At 34, he carried the confidence of a man who had led dozens of successful operations. "Sir, with all due respect, we were told we'd be getting the military's best sniper instructor." "You are," Richards replied curtly. Kyle Thompson, a sharp-faced operator from Texas, let out a barely audible scoff. "Come on, General, we're supposed to trust our lives to someone who looks like she should be teaching kindergarten." Janet remained perfectly still, her expression neutral. She had faced this reaction countless times before. In a profession dominated by testosterone and tradition, being taken seriously required more than just skill. It demanded proving herself over and over again. "I understand your concerns," she said, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who had nothing to prove and everything to lose. "Your skepticism might keep you alive someday. But right now, it's the only thing standing between you and becoming the deadliest counterterrorism unit this country has ever produced." Connor Blake, the youngest at 26, raised his hand tentatively. "Ma'am, what's your longest confirmed kill?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a spent cartridge. Janet's mind flashed back to a rocky outcrop in Afghanistan, the impossible wind conditions, and a target that intelligence said couldn't be reached. She remembered the weight of the rifle, the calculations running through her mind, and the split second when everything aligned perfectly. 3,847 meters, she said simply. Helmand Province, 2018. The silence that followed was deafening. Even David's expression shifted from skepticism to grudging interest. The current world record for a confirmed sniper kill stood at 3,540 meters, held by a British soldier. If Janet's claim was true, she had shattered it by more than 300 meters. "That's impossible," Nathan Brooks whispered. The demolitions expert had been quiet until now, but the number had clearly shaken him. "Impossible is a word I don't use," Janet replied. "The shot was made during a sandstorm with crosswinds gusting up to 40 miles per hour. The target was a Taliban commander who had been executing captured civilians. My spotter said I was crazy to even try." She walked to the tactical display board, picking up a marker with practiced ease. The key wasn't the distance. It was understanding that sometimes the impossible is just a calculation you haven't made yet. Tyler Walsh, a communications specialist with nervous energy, leaned forward. "How do we know you're not just telling us war stories?" Janet's smile was cold as winter steel. "Because in 3 hours you're going to watch me do it again." The proving ground stretched across 2 miles of varied terrain designed to test every aspect of marksmanship under extreme conditions. Janet had requested the range be set up with targets at increasing distances, culminating in a final target placed at 200 meters, beyond the effective range of most sniper rifles and well past what anyone considered reasonable for a demonstration. The team gathered at the observation post, their earlier bravado replaced by a tense anticipation. General Richards had joined them along with several other high-ranking officials who had driven down from the Pentagon specifically to witness this demonstration. Janet took her position at the firing line, her movements deliberate and methodical. She wore standard-issue combat fatigues but carried her personal rifle, a modified Barrett M82A1 that she had customized over years of field use. Every component had been carefully selected and tested, from the Schmidt and Bender scope to the specialized ammunition she loaded herself. "First target, 800 meters, she announced, settling into a prone position behind the massive rifle. The Barrett's .50 caliber round was designed for anti-material purposes, but in the right hands it could reach out and touch targets at distances that seemed impossible. The first shot rang out across the range, the rifle's report echoing off the surrounding hills. Through their binoculars, the team watched as the distant target dissolved in a cloud of dust and debris. "Clean hit, center mass," David reported, his voice carrying a note of respect that hadn't been there an hour earlier. "Next target, 1,500 meters. Again, the thunder of the Barrett filled the air. Again, a perfect hit. Janet worked her way through the targets methodically, each shot finding its mark with mechanical precision. At 2,000 meters, she paused to check wind conditions, consulting a small device that measured atmospheric pressure and humidity. The science of extreme long-range shooting was as much about environmental factors as it was about marksmanship. 2,500 meters, she called out. The distant target was barely visible, even through high-powered optics, a small white square against the brown backdrop of the Nevada desert. Janet made minute adjustments to her scope, calculating bullet drop wind drift and the Coriolis effect, the subtle influence of the Earth's rotation on a projectile's flight path. The shot seemed to hang in the air forever. At that distance, the bullet would take more than 3 seconds to reach its target, during which a dozen variables could throw off its trajectory. When the target finally disintegrated, the gathered officials erupted in impressed murmurs. But Janet wasn't finished. "Final target," she announced, 3,200 meters. The target at this distance was invisible to the naked eye, a theoretical point in space that existed only in the crosshairs of her scope. The mathematics involved were staggering. The bullet would drop more than 20 feet during its flight, and even a 5-mile-per-hour crosswind could push it several feet off course. Janet closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the subtle changes in air pressure, the barely perceptible shift in wind direction. This was where science ended and instinct began, where years of experience became an almost supernatural ability to read the invisible forces at play. She opened her eyes and settled behind the scope, her breathing slowing to the rhythm she had perfected in 100 different conflicts. The crosshairs found their mark, and she began the careful process of aligning every variable in her favor. The trigger broke like glass, and the Barrett roared its defiance at the laws of physics. 3.5 seconds later, a tiny puff of dust appeared on the distant hillside, and the spotting scope confirmed what everyone had witnessed. Another impossible shot made to look routine. The range fell silent, except for the ringing in everyone's ears. Janet stood and saved her weapon, her expression unchanged by what had just transpired. "Gentlemen," General Richards said finally, "any questions about your instructor's qualifications?" The transformation in the team's attitude was immediate and complete. David stepped forward, extending his hand with the kind of respect usually reserved for fellow warriors. "Ma'am, it would be an honor to train under you." The others quickly followed suit, their earlier skepticism replaced by something approaching awe. They had just witnessed something that bordered on the miraculous, a demonstration of skill that redefined their understanding of what was possible. But Janet knew that earning their respect was only the first step. What she had to teach them went far beyond marksmanship. It was about becoming something more than human when the situation demanded it, about finding calm in chaos and precision in panic. "Tomorrow we begin your real education," she told them. "What you've seen today is just the beginning. We have 6 weeks to turn you into something that this world has never seen. A counterterrorism sniper unit capable of eliminating threats that conventional forces can't touch." Kyle raised his hand tentatively. "What kind of threats are we talking about, ma'am?" Janet's expression darkened as she thought about the classified briefings she had received. "The kind that keep generals awake at night, and make presidents authorize operations that officially don't exist. As the team dispersed to prepare for the intensive training ahead, General Richards approached Janet privately. That was impressive even by your standards, but I need to brief you on why this program is so urgent. They walked to a secure conference room where classified documents waited under lock and key. The general's expression was grim as he spread intelligence photos across the table. 3 weeks ago, we intercepted communications from a cell operating in North Africa. They're planning something big, potentially the largest terrorist attack on American soil since 9/11. Janet studied the surveillance photos, recognizing the tactical preparations and defensive positions of a well-organized enemy. What's the timeline? Unknown, but intelligence suggests they're in the final preparation phase. The problem is their location, a compound in the Sahara Desert miles from any conventional military support. If we're going to stop them, it'll require the kind of precision operation that only a specialized sniper team can execute. And you want my teams ready in 6 weeks. I want your team ready in 4. The situation is deteriorating faster than we anticipated. Janet nodded, understanding the weight of responsibility that had just settled on her shoulders. Training these men wasn't just about creating an elite unit. It was about forging a weapon precise enough to prevent catastrophe. The next morning brought the kind of heat that made the desert shimmer like a mirage. Janet had chosen the Mojave Desert Training Facility specifically for its brutal conditions, knowing that comfort bred complacency, and complacency got soldiers killed. The 6 SEALs stood in formation as she outlined the training regimen that would consume their lives for the next month. Physical conditioning, advanced marksmanship, environmental adaptation, and tactical planning would be compressed into an intensive program that would push each man to his breaking point and beyond. The enemy we're preparing to face doesn't follow conventional rules of engagement. She began pacing in front of the assembled team. They use women and children as shields. They booby-trap wounded soldiers, and they would rather them on than surrender. Your compassion, while admirable, will get you killed if you hesitate for even a moment. David raised his hand. Ma'am, how do we maintain our humanity while becoming efficient killers? It was the question Janet had struggled with throughout her own career. The balance between remaining human and becoming the tool that humanity needed. By remembering that every life you take saves dozens of innocent ones. Your job isn't to be a killer. It's to be a protector who happens to kill when protection requires it. The training began immediately with a 20-mile forced march across the desert carrying full combat loads. Janet set a punishing pace, her smaller frame moving with the kind of efficiency that comes from years of carrying heavy equipment across hostile terrain. By the 3rd hour, Connor was struggling to keep up, his face flushed with heat exhaustion. Janet called a halt and gathered the team around a small patch of shade provided by a rocky outcrop. This is where most training programs would tell you to push through the pain, she said, offering Connor a small sip from her water bottle. I'm going to tell you something different. Intelligence and adaptation will keep you alive longer than pure stubbornness. She pointed to the rocky terrain around them. In Afghanistan, I spent 3 days pinned down by enemy fire and terrain just like this. I survived not because I was the toughest, but because I learned to read the environment and use it to my advantage. The lesson continued with practical demonstrations of how to find water, create shelter, and move undetected across open ground. Each technique was explained not just in theory, but in the context of real combat situations where the margin for error was measured in heartbeats. As the days progressed, the team began to function with the kind of synchronization that marked truly elite units. David's natural leadership abilities were enhanced by tactical insights Janet shared from years of battlefield command. Kyle's technical skills were refined through exposure to cutting-edge equipment and unconventional applications. Connor, despite his youth, showed an intuitive understanding of ballistics that impressed even Janet. Nathan's explosive expertise was expanded to include improvised devices and counter-demolition techniques. Alex proved to have an almost supernatural ability to read terrain and identify optimal firing positions. Only Tyler seemed to struggle with certain aspects of the training, particularly the psychological conditioning designed to eliminate hesitation in high-stress situations. Janet made note of his difficulties, but attributed them to the natural adjustment period that all soldiers faced when transitioning to specialized operations. The breakthrough moment came during the 3rd week of training when a simulated combat exercise went catastrophically wrong. The scenario involved a hostage rescue in an urban environment, with the team required to neutralize multiple targets while avoiding civilian casualties. Janet was observing from an elevated position when she noticed something that made her blood run cold, a structural weakness in the building that the exercise planners had overlooked. Abort! She screamed it into her radio, but it was too late. The explosion that followed was caused by a faulty gas line that had been damaged during the mock assault. David, who had been leading the entry team, was caught in the blast and thrown against a concrete wall with bone-crushing force. Janet was moving before the dust settled, rappelling down from her observation post with the kind of speed that came from years of combat rescues. She reached David's position to find him conscious, but badly injured, his left leg twisted at an unnatural angle and blood streaming from a head wound. "Stay with me, Marine," she commanded using the voice that had guided wounded soldiers through dozens of life-or-death situations. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, checking for spinal injuries and applying pressure to bleeding wounds. The rest of the team arrived within moments, their training taking over as they secured the area and prepared for medical evacuation. But it was Janet's immediate response that had likely saved David's life, and every man present understood the significance of what they had witnessed. As the medical helicopter lifted off, carrying David to the nearest trauma center, Janet gathered the remaining team members. The shock of seeing their leader injured had shaken them, but she knew this was also an opportunity to forge the kind of bonds that would hold them together in real combat. "This is what it means to be part of something larger than yourself," she told them. "David will recover because you responded as a team. In 6 months, when you're in the field facing real enemies, that same instinct to protect each other will be the difference between coming home alive and coming home in a box." Kyle stepped forward, his earlier skepticism completely gone. "Ma'am, David's going to be okay, right?" "He'll be fine," Janet assured him. "Broken leg concussion and some colorful bruises. He'll be back in 2 weeks, probably complaining about being stuck in a hospital bed." True to her prediction, David returned to training exactly 14 days later, his leg in a cast but his determination intact. If anything, the experience had strengthened his respect for Janet's leadership and his commitment to the mission. The final phase of training took place in conditions designed to simulate the harsh environment they would face in North Africa. The temperature reached 120 degrees during the day and dropped to near freezing at night, creating the kind of thermal stress that broke down equipment and shattered concentration. It was during this phase that Janet received the call that changed everything. "Phoenix, we need you in Washington immediately." General Richard's voice crackled through the encrypted satellite phone. "The situation has accelerated beyond our worst-case scenarios." Janet gathered her team in the briefing tent, their faces grim as she delivered the news. "Gentlemen, graduation just got moved up. We deploy in 72 hours. The silence that followed was filled with the weight of unfinished training and unanswered questions. These men were as ready as they could be given the circumstances, but Janet knew that real preparation could only come from facing the enemy in actual combat. "What's the target?" David asked, his voice steady despite the cast on his leg. "A compound in the Sahara Desert, approximately 200 miles south of the Libyan border. Intelligence indicates it's being used as a training facility and planning center for a major terrorist operation against the United States." Janet activated the tactical display, showing satellite imagery of a fortified position built into the rocky terrain of an isolated valley. The compound was surrounded by natural barriers that made conventional assault nearly impossible, but also provided the kind of long-range shooting opportunities that a specialized sniper team could exploit. "Our mission is simple in concept, complex in execution," she continued. "Eliminate all hostile personnel and gather intelligence on their operational plans. Secondary objective is to locate and destroy any materials or equipment that could be used in future attacks." Connor raised his hand tentatively. "Ma'am, what about extraction? That's a long way from friendly forces." "Extraction will be by helicopter from a landing zone approximately 5 miles north of the target. Total mission duration is estimated at 18 hours, including infill operation and exfil." The briefing continued for another hour, covering everything from weather conditions to ammunition loadouts. Each man would carry specialized equipment designed for the specific challenges they would face, from desert camouflage to high-temperature lubricants for their weapons. But even as Janet outlined the technical details, her mind was focused on the human element that would ultimately determine their success or failure. These men had trained together, bled together, and learned to trust each other in ways that went beyond normal military bonding. They were ready as anyone could be for what they were about to face. The final night before deployment was spent in individual preparation and quiet reflection. Janet found herself standing outside the barracks, looking up at the stars that would soon provide navigation reference points in a hostile desert thousands of miles away. David approached, moving carefully on his healing leg. "Ma'am, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Are you worried about leading us into this?" Janet considered the question carefully. Fear was a luxury that leaders couldn't afford, but honest assessment of risks was essential for survival. "I'm concerned about variables we can't control, whether enemy reinforcements, equipment failures, but I'm confident in this team's ability to adapt and overcome whatever we face." Even with my leg, she turned to study his face in the starlight. "David, you're thinking like a liability instead of thinking like a leader. Your job isn't to be the fastest or strongest, it's to make the right decisions when everything goes wrong. And that's something a cast can't interfere with." The conversation was interrupted by Tyler's approach's nervous energy, more pronounced than usual. "Ma'am, sorry to interrupt, but I just received some updated intelligence reports. The enemy strength estimates have been revised upward." Janet accepted the encrypted tablet and reviewed the new information. Instead of 20 to 30 militants, they were now looking at potentially 40 or more, with several high-value targets confirmed to be present at the compound. "This changes our tactical approach," she said finally. "We'll need to rely more heavily on precision engagement and less on close assault, but the mission parameters remain the same." As her team prepared for sleep, Janet retreated to her own quarters to make a final secure call to General Richards. The conversation that followed would haunt her for years to come, though she couldn't know that yet. "Phoenix, there's something else you need to know about this mission." The general's voice was tight with tension. "Intelligence suggests there may be American personnel being held at the compound. Hostages, possibly. Or possibly something worse. We've lost contact with two deep cover operatives who were tracking this cell. They may be compromised, they may be dead, or they may be turned." The implications hit Janet like a physical blow. If there were American operatives at the compound, the mission had just become infinitely more complex. Rules of engagement would be complicated by the need to identify friend from foe in a hostile environment where mistakes carry deadly consequences. "Sir, my team needs to know about this possibility." "Negative. This information is classified at the highest levels. You'll brief them only if the situation develops in the field." Janet understood the logic but disagreed with the decision. Her team's survival depended on having complete information about what they might face. But orders were orders, and she would find a way to protect her men without violating operational security. The final dawn in Nevada brought a clarity that only came before dangerous missions. Equipment was checked and double-checked, communications procedures were reviewed one final time, and each man spent a few moments writing letters that would only be sent if they didn't return. Janet gathered her team for the last time on American soil, their faces reflecting the mixture of anticipation and professional calm that marked true warriors. In 6 weeks, these 6 men had been transformed from skeptical operators into a cohesive unit capable of executing missions that most people couldn't even imagine. "Gentlemen," she began, her voice carrying the weight of everything they had shared and everything they were about to face. "Today you become more than soldiers. Today you become the tip of the spear that protects millions of innocent people who will never know your names." The aircraft that would carry them to their destiny was already warming up on the tarmac, its engines adding urgency to her final words. "Remember your training, trust each other, and bring everyone home. That's an order." As they boarded the transport aircraft that would begin their journey to North Africa, Janet felt the familiar mixture of confidence and concern that preceded every dangerous mission. Her team was as ready as they could be, but the desert ahead held challenges that no amount of training could fully prepare them for. The first phase of Operation Phoenix was complete. The real test was about to begin. The C-130 Hercules cut through the night sky at 30,000 feet, its 4 turboprop engines maintaining the steady rhythm that had carried American forces into hostile territory for decades. Inside the cargo compartment, Janet's team made final preparations for what would be the most dangerous mission of their careers. The flight from Nevada to North Africa had taken 14 hours with a single refueling stop at a classified location in the Mediterranean. Now, as they approached their insertion point, each man performed the ritual of checking and rechecking equipment that could mean the difference between life and death. Janet moved through the cramped space with the easy confidence of someone who had made dozens of similar insertions. Her personal gear was arranged with military precision, the modified Barrett M82A1 secured in its custom case a backup SR-25 rifle for closer engagements, and enough ammunition to sustain extended combat operations. 15 minutes to drop zone, the loadmaster announced, his voice barely audible above the aircraft's engines. David looked up from his equipment check, the cast on his leg replaced by a lightweight brace that would allow him to function in the field. Ma'am, final communications check. Janet activated her throat mic and cycled through the team's radio frequencies, confirming that each man's equipment was functioning properly. In the hostile environment they were entering, reliable communications could be the only thing preventing friendly fire incidents or missed extraction opportunities. All stations, this is Phoenix, she transmitted. Radio check. Bravo 1 loud and clear, David responded using his operational call sign. Bravo 2 good copy, Kyle added. One by one, each team member confirmed their communications were operational. Only Tyler's response seemed slightly delayed, though Janet attributed this to pre-mission nerves rather than equipment problems. The aircraft began its descent toward the drop zone, a remote area of the Sahara Desert chosen for its distance from populated areas and known enemy positions. The plan called for a high-altitude, low-opening halo jump that would allow them to insert undetected under cover of darkness. Janet had made more than 100 combat jumps during her career, but the moments before stepping out of an aircraft never lost their intensity. The combination of anticipation, focus, and controlled fear created a mental state that sharpened every sense and prepared the mind for the violence that lay ahead. Final gear check, she called out, beginning the systematic inspection that would ensure no equipment failures during the critical insertion phase. Each man's parachute was examined for proper packing and connection points. Weapons were secured, but accessible ammunition was distributed to prevent total loss if one team member was killed or wounded, and emergency beacons were activated to provide location data to extraction forces. The rear cargo door began to open, revealing a star-filled sky above the endless expanse of desert below. The temperature differential between the heated aircraft and the cold night air created a rushing wind that made communication difficult. Janet positioned herself at the door, her role as jump master, adding another layer of responsibility to an already complex mission. Not only did she need to ensure her team reached their targets safely, but she had to coordinate their insertion to maintain tactical spacing while preventing the kind of scatter that could leave individuals isolated in hostile territory. 5 minutes, she shouted, raising her hand to signal the final preparation phase. The team formed up in jump order, each man checking the equipment of the person in front of him. This buddy check system had prevented countless accidents by catching loose straps, improperly secured weapons, or malfunctioning altimeters before they became fatal problems. Connor, despite being the youngest team member, had proven himself to be an exceptional paratrooper during training. His natural athletic ability and fearless approach to new challenges made him ideally suited for the specialized insertion techniques required by their mission. Nathan, the team's explosive specialist, carried additional equipment that would be crucial for breaching fortified positions or creating diversions during their assault on the compound. His expertise with both conventional and improvised devices had been refined during years of urban combat operations. Alex had volunteered to carry the team's heavy communications equipment, accepting the additional weight in exchange for the responsibility of maintaining contact with command and control elements. His background in electronic warfare made him invaluable for detecting and countering enemy surveillance systems. 2 minutes, Janet called out, her voice cutting through the wind noise. Kyle moved to the edge of the cargo door, his Texas-bred confidence evident even in the face of jumping into enemy territory at night. His sniper skills, while not quite at Janet's legendary level, were more than sufficient for the precision work their mission would require. Tyler's nervousness was more apparent now, his movements slightly jerky as he made final adjustments to his gear. Janet made a mental note to keep a close eye on him during the initial phase of the mission, when stress and adrenaline could cause even experienced operators to make fatal mistakes. 1 minute. The red light above the cargo door began blinking, indicating their approach to the optimal release point. Janet consulted her GPS unit one final time, confirming their position relative to the planned drop zone and making minute adjustments to account for wind drift. 30 seconds. David positioned himself directly behind Janet, ready to follow her out of the aircraft and maintain visual contact during the descent. As team leader on the ground, his ability to rally the unit after insertion would be critical to their mission success. 10 seconds. Janet felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that preceded every high-risk operation. Time seemed to slow as she focused on the green light that would signal their departure from relative safety into the unknown dangers of enemy territory. Go, go, go! She stepped into empty space, feeling the immediate rush of wind and the sensation of falling that preceded the deployment of her parachute. Behind her, the rest of the team followed in quick succession, their dark figures disappearing into the night sky like deadly shadows. The silence after leaving the aircraft was profound, broken only by the whisper of wind through her equipment and the distant sound of the C-130's engines fading into the distance. Janet deployed her parachute at the predetermined altitude, feeling the reassuring jerk as the canopy opened and her rate of descent slowed to manageable levels. Below, the desert stretched endlessly in all directions, its surface broken by rocky outcrops and scattered vegetation that would provide concealment during their approach to the target. The compound they had studied in satellite imagery was still 20 kilometers away, invisible in the darkness, but fixed in Janet's mind like a beacon. One by one, her team members signaled their successful deployments, their infrared strobes visible only through the night vision equipment they all wore. The insertion was proceeding according to plan, with each paratrooper maintaining proper spacing and heading toward the designated rally point. Janet touched down on the rocky desert floor with the kind of controlled landing that came from years of practice. Her parachute was quickly gathered and concealed following procedures designed to prevent enemy forces from detecting their presence through discarded equipment. Within 15 minutes, the entire team had successfully reached the rally point and established a defensive perimeter. Their equipment was inspected for damage from the insertion, communications with command elements were confirmed, and the mission timeline was synchronized to account for any delays. All stations sound off, Janet whispered into her throat mic. Each team member confirmed his status and readiness to proceed. David's injured leg showed no signs of complications from the parachute landing, and Tyler's nervousness seemed to have settled into the focused calm that marked professional soldiers in combat situations. The march to their observation point would take 6 hours, covering terrain that satellite imagery had identified as difficult but passable for a small, well-equipped team. They would move in tactical formation with scouts forward and rear security, maintaining awareness of potential threats from all directions. Janet took point, her night vision equipment, turning the darkness into a green-tinted landscape where every rock and bush stood out in sharp detail. Navigation was accomplished through a combination of GPS coordinates and traditional land navigation techniques that would remain accurate even if their electronic systems failed. The desert at night was far from silent. The rustle of small animals moving through sparse vegetation, the whisper of wind across sand and stone, and the distant calls of nocturnal birds created a symphony that experienced soldiers learned to interpret for signs of human presence. 2 hours into their movement, Kyle raised his fist in the signal for immediate halt. The team dropped into defensive positions, weapons ready, senses straining to detect whatever had triggered the warning. Movement 2 o'clock, approximately 300 meters, Kyle whispered into his radio. Janet trained her rifle scope on the indicated direction, adjusting the magnification to maximum power. Through the sophisticated optics, she could make out 3 figures moving across their path, following what appeared to be an established trail through the rocky terrain. The figures carried weapons and moved with the kind of tactical awareness that suggested military training. Whether they were enemy, scouts, smugglers, or simply nomads armed for protection was impossible to determine from their current distance. "Hold position," Janet ordered. "Let them pass." The 3 figures continued their movement without showing any awareness of the American team's presence. Janet's training and experience told her to avoid contact whenever possible during infiltration phases, but she also made note of their location and direction of travel for inclusion in intelligence reports. After the figures disappeared into the night, the team resumed their movement toward the target area. The encounter had reminded everyone that they were now operating in territory where any human contact could potentially compromise their mission and endanger their lives. Dawn was still 3 hours away when they reached the observation point that had been selected from satellite imagery. The position offered clear lines of sight to the terrorist compound while providing concealment and multiple escape routes if their location was discovered. Janet established a hide site using natural terrain features and camouflage materials they had carried specifically for this purpose. From their concealed position, they could observe the target area through high-powered optics while remaining virtually invisible to enemy surveillance. The compound was exactly as described in their intelligence briefings, a collection of low buildings built into a natural depression in the rocky terrain. Defensive positions were clearly visible, along with vehicles and equipment that confirmed the presence of a significant enemy force. Visual confirmation of target, Janet reported through her encrypted satellite communication system. Compound appears to be fully occupied with multiple sentries and defensive positions. The response from command came back within minutes. Phoenix, you are cleared to proceed with reconnaissance phase. Gather intelligence on enemy strength and defensive preparations. For the next 6 hours, Janet's team maintained careful observation of the terrorist compound, documenting everything they saw through digital cameras equipped with powerful telephoto lenses. Guard rotations were noted, vehicle movements were recorded, and the locations of weapons emplacements were mapped with precision that would be crucial for planning their assault. It was Connor who first spotted something that changed their understanding of the mission entirely. Ma'am, I've got what looks like American personnel in the compound. Janet immediately focused her attention on the area Connor had indicated, adjusting her optics for maximum clarity. Through the shimmering heat distortion, she could make out two figures whose clothing and posture suggested they were not part of the terrorist organization. The men appeared to be under guard, their movements restricted to a small area near one of the buildings. From their positioning and the behavior of their captors, it was clear they were prisoners rather than willing participants in whatever operation the compound supported. Command, this is Phoenix, Janet transmitted. Be advised, we have visual confirmation of what appear to be American hostages at the target location. The silence that followed was longer than normal, suggesting urgent consultations at the highest levels of government. When the response finally came, it carried the weight of presidential authorization. Phoenix mission parameters have changed. You are now authorized to attempt rescue of American personnel if tactically feasible. Primary mission remains elimination of terrorist threat. Janet gathered her team for an immediate planning session. The presence of hostages complicated every aspect of their mission, from the approach route to the method of assault to the extraction procedures. Gentlemen, we now have a rescue component to our mission, she began, her voice carrying the gravity of their expanded responsibilities. This changes our risk assessment and our tactical approach. David studied the compound through his binoculars. Ma'am, attempting a rescue with 6 people against 40-plus hostiles is going to be challenging. Challenging is what we train for, Janet replied. The question is whether we can create enough confusion and elimination to extract the hostages without getting them killed in the crossfire. Kyle raised his hand. What if we use a diversion draw of some of their personnel while a smaller element extracts the hostages? That's exactly what we're going to do, Janet confirmed. But first we need to identify the best approach routes and confirm the hostages' exact location. The planning session continued for another hour, with each team member contributing ideas based on his specialized training and experience. Nathan's explosive expertise would be crucial for creating diversions and breaching fortified positions. Alex's communication skills would be essential for coordinating the complex operation and maintaining contact with extraction forces. Connor's youth and agility made him ideal for the high-risk infiltration that hostage rescue would require. Tyler's support role would involve providing covering fire and maintaining security of their equipment and escape routes. As they refined their tactical plan, Janet noticed Tyler's increasing nervousness. His questions seemed focused on extraction procedures and backup plans, rather than the assault phase that would determine their mission success. Tyler, you seem concerned about something specific, she observed. Just want to make sure we've covered all the contingencies, ma'am, he replied, though his tone suggested deeper worries. Janet made another mental note, but attributed his concerns to the natural stress that came with modified mission parameters. Every soldier reacted differently to the knowledge that their lives depended on plans that were still being developed. The afternoon brought oppressive heat that made observation difficult and equipment maintenance critical. Water consumption was carefully monitored to prevent dehydration, while weapons and optics were protected from sand and thermal expansion that could affect their accuracy. It was during this period that Janet made a discovery that would haunt her for years to come. While conducting routine equipment checks, she noticed that Tyler's radio was set to a frequency that didn't match their operational plan. When she questioned him about it, his explanation was evasive and technically implausible. Tyler, show me your communications card, she ordered, referring to the document that listed all authorized frequencies for their mission. The document he produced matched his radio settings, but Janet's memory for detail told her something was wrong. The frequency he was monitoring wasn't listed in the original briefings, and his explanation for its inclusion didn't match proper communications procedures. A cold suspicion began to form in Janet's mind, but she needed more information before acting on it. Instead of confronting Tyler immediately, she decided to maintain surveillance on his actions while continuing mission preparations. The opportunity came sooner than expected. During a routine security check, Janet observed Tyler moving to a position where he couldn't be seen by other team members. Using her rifle scope, she watched as he retrieved what appeared to be a small communications device from his equipment pack. The device was clearly not standard issue, and Tyler's furtive behavior suggested he was transmitting information without authorization. Janet's training in counterintelligence told her she was witnessing either a security breach or outright treason. Her first instinct was to confront Tyler immediately, but tactical considerations demanded a more careful approach. If he was indeed compromised, immediate confrontation could trigger defensive actions that would endanger the entire team. Instead, Janet made a careful approach that would allow her to observe Tyler's actions without alerting him to her suspicions. What she discovered confirmed her worst fears and changed the nature of their mission entirely. Tyler was indeed transmitting their position and mission details to an unknown recipient. The equipment he was using was sophisticated enough to penetrate their operational security, and his knowledge of their plans was complete enough to compromise every aspect of their mission. Janet faced a decision that would define the rest of the operation. She could arrest Tyler immediately, potentially preventing further information leakage, but also reducing their effective strength by 1/6. Alternatively, she could allow him to continue operating while feeding him false information that might confuse enemy preparations. The decision was made for her when Tyler's transmission was answered by someone speaking Arabic, a language Janet understood well enough to recognize discussions of ambush positions and timing. "Command, this is Phoenix," she transmitted on a frequency she was certain Tyler couldn't monitor. "We have a compromised situation. Request immediate guidance." The response came back within minutes, carrying authorization that Janet had hoped never to receive. "Phoenix, you are authorized to take whatever actions necessary to protect mission integrity and team safety." Janet understood the euphemism. She was being given permission to eliminate Tyler if necessary to prevent further compromise of their position and mission. It was an authorization that carried the weight of national security in the lives of her remaining team members. The confrontation took place at sunset when the team was preparing for the night assault that would determine their mission's success or failure. Janet approached Tyler's position with the kind of casual confidence that concealed deadly intent. "Tyler, I need to discuss communications procedures with you," she said, positioning herself where she could control his access to weapons. The moment of recognition was immediate and mutual. Tyler's hand moved toward his sidearm, confirming Janet's suspicions about his intentions, but her superior training and preparation gave her the decisive advantage. "Don't," she said simply, her own weapon already drawn and aimed at center mass. The standoff that followed lasted only seconds but felt like hours to both participants. Tyler's eyes showed the desperation of someone whose carefully planned deception had been discovered, while Janet's expression carried the cold professionalism of someone prepared to do whatever was necessary. "How long?" she asked. "Since before the mission began," Tyler replied, his voice carrying a mixture of defiance and resignation. "They have my family." It was the oldest form of coercion in the intelligence world, and Janet felt a moment of sympathy for the impossible position Tyler had been placed in. But sympathy couldn't override the reality that his cooperation with enemy forces had potentially doomed them all. "Phoenix, what's your status?" David's voice crackled through her earpiece. "Stand by," she replied, never taking her eyes off Tyler. The resolution came suddenly. Tyler made the decision that Janet had hoped to avoid, lunging for his weapon in a desperate attempt to maintain his deception. Her response was immediate and final. 2 rounds center mass that ended both his betrayal and his torment. The sound of gunfire brought the rest of the team running their weapons ready for contact with enemy forces. What they found instead was Janet standing over Tyler's body, her expression grim, with the knowledge of what his betrayal meant for their mission. "He was compromised," she said simply. "They know we're here." The implications were immediate and terrifying. Their position was blown. Their mission timeline was compressed, and their tactical advantage was gone. Instead of conducting a carefully planned assault on an unsuspecting enemy, they would now be fighting for survival against a prepared and alerted force. "How much time do we have?" David asked, his tactical mind immediately shifting to damage assessment and contingency planning. "Unknown," Janet replied, "but we have to assume they're moving to intercept us right now." The team immediately began emergency procedures for compromise operations. Equipment was redistributed to account for Tyler's lost escape routes were reconfirmed, and communication protocols were changed to prevent further interception of their plans. But even as they prepared for the worst-case scenario, Janet's mind was already working on how to turn their disadvantage into an opportunity. The enemy's knowledge of their presence could be used against them if properly exploited. "Gentlemen," she said, gathering the team around her for what might be their final planning session, "they expect us to run, they expect us to abort and call for extraction. They do not expect us to attack." Kyle looked up from his equipment check. "Ma'am, are you suggesting we proceed with the mission?" "I'm suggesting we accelerate it," Janet replied. "Hit them before they can fully prepare their defenses." The audacity of the plan was breathtaking. Instead of withdrawing in the face of superior numbers and compromised security, Janet was proposing to attack immediately with reduced strength against an alerted enemy. Connor shook his head in amazement. "That's either brilliant or suicidal." "Sometimes," Janet said with a smile that held no warmth, "the difference between those two things is just a matter of execution." The final assault would begin in 30 minutes under cover of darkness that would provide their only remaining tactical advantage. They would either complete their mission and rescue the hostages, or they would die in the attempt. But they would not retreat, and they would not abandon their duty to the innocent people whose lives depended on their success. The war was about to begin in earnest. The desert night transformed into Janet's hunting ground as she activated protocols that had made her a legend among the world's most elite snipers. With Tyler's betrayal exposed and their position compromised, conventional tactics were no longer an option. It was time to become the ghost that had earned her call sign through 100 impossible missions. "All stations, this is Phoenix," she whispered into her throat mic. "We're going to full stealth protocol. From this moment, we are ghosts." David checked his weapon one final time, his injured leg forgotten in the adrenaline rush of imminent combat. "Ma'am, 5 of us against 40-plus hostiles. What are our odds?" "The same as they've always been," Janet replied, her voice carrying the quiet confidence that had guided countless soldiers through impossible situations. "We either complete the mission or we die trying. There is no middle ground." The team spread out across the rocky terrain, each man taking a position that would maximize their individual strengths while maintaining mutual support. Connor's youth and agility placed him closest to the compound, where his speed would be crucial for the hostage rescue attempt. Nathan positioned his explosives at strategic points that would create maximum confusion when detonated. Alex established a communications post that would coordinate their scattered elements while maintaining contact with the extraction forces. Kyle took an elevated position that would provide overwatch for the assault team, his sniper rifle loaded with match-grade ammunition designed for precision work at extended ranges. David, despite his injury, insisted on leading the direct assault element that would breach the compound's main defenses. But it was Janet who occupied the most dangerous position of all. 3 kilometers from the compound, she established a hide site that provided clear lines of sight to multiple target areas while offering virtually no protection if her position was discovered. Her Barrett M82A1 was set up with mechanical precision, every adjustment calculated to compensate for the extreme range and environmental conditions she would face. The first phase of their assault would begin with what Janet privately called the impossible shot. Intelligence gathered during their observation had identified the compound's command center, where enemy leaders were coordinating their response to the known American presence. Eliminating the leadership would create confusion and disrupt communications at the critical moment when the assault team moved to rescue the hostages. But the target was located deep within the compound, protected by multiple barriers, and positioned at a range that pushed the absolute limits of even the most sophisticated sniper systems. Janet consulted her range card one final time, confirming the distance at 3,932 meters, nearly 4 kilometers of empty desert air that would test every aspect of her legendary marksmanship skills. "Phoenix, this is Bravo 1, David's voice crackled through her earpiece. "We're in position and ready to move on your signal." "Copy Bravo 1, stand by for target elimination." Janet settled behind her rifle with the kind of ritual precision that came from years of practice. Her breathing slowed to the rhythm she had perfected in a dozen different conflicts, each exhale bringing her closer to the meditative state where human limitations became irrelevant. The mathematics of extreme long-range shooting were staggering. At nearly 4 kilometers, her bullet would take more than 4 seconds to reach its target, during which time the Earth's rotation would influence its path. Wind conditions, air density, temperature variations, and even the slight vibrations from her own heartbeat could throw off a shot at this distance. But Janet had made impossible shots before. Through her scope, she could see the target building where enemy commanders were gathered. The intelligence provided by Tyler before his betrayal had included detailed information about the compound's layout, and Janet knew exactly where her target would be positioned. She made final adjustments to her scope, compensating for the crosswind that had been building throughout the evening. The shot would require leading the target by nearly 2 feet to account for bullet flight time, and the bullet drop at this range would be more than 30 feet. All stations to Phoenix is taking the shot in 30 seconds, she transmitted. The countdown began in her mind, a mental chronometer that had guided her through countless life or death moments. At this distance, timing was as crucial as accuracy. The slightest delay could allow the target to move from her crosshairs. 20 seconds. Janet's world contracted to the small circle of magnified image in her scope. Everything else, the desert around her, the danger to her team, the weight of national security, faded into background noise as she focused on the single task that would determine their mission's success. 15 seconds. She could feel her heartbeat in her fingertips, the steady rhythm that would provide the pause between beats when her shot would fire. Years of training had taught her to recognize the exact moment when all variables aligned in her favor. 10 seconds. The crosshairs found their target, and Janet began the final sequence of muscle control that would send a half-inch diameter bullet across nearly 4 miles of hostile territory. Her trigger finger applied pressure with the delicate touch of a surgeon feeling for the precise point where the firing pin would release. 5 seconds. Time seemed to slow as Janet entered the zone that separated legendary shooters from merely competent ones. In this state, she could feel the rotation of the earth beneath her, sense the minute changes in wind direction, and calculate trajectories that existed only in the realm of theoretical possibility. The trigger broke like glass. The Barrett's massive report echoed across the desert, a thunderclap that announced the beginning of what would become known as the most audacious special operations mission in American military history. The recoil sent shockwaves through Janet's body, but her scope remained trained on the target area, waiting for confirmation of impact. 4.5 seconds later, a small puff of dust appeared near the target building, followed immediately by the collapse of a section of the structure's exterior wall. Through her scope, Janet could see figures running in confusion, their careful preparations disrupted by a shot that had come from beyond their defensive perimeter. "Target eliminated," she reported. "Bravo 1, you are clear to proceed." The assault began immediately with David leading Connor and Kyle toward the compound, while Nathan's explosives created diversions at strategic points around the perimeter. The plan was brutally simple in concept: create maximum chaos while moving quickly to locate and extract the American hostages. But the enemy response was faster and more organized than they had anticipated. Despite the confusion caused by Janet's impossible shot, the terrorist forces had been prepared for an American assault. Defensive positions that had been invisible during their reconnaissance phase suddenly came alive with automatic weapons fire, and the compound's exterior was illuminated by flares that turned the night into deadly daylight. "Contact! Contact!" David's voice came through the radio with the sharp clarity that marked experienced soldiers under fire. Multiple defensive positions, heavy automatic weapons. Janet immediately shifted her attention to providing overwatch support for her team, using her elevated position to identify and eliminate threats that her assault team couldn't see. The Barrett's powerful rounds were devastating against personnel and light equipment, each shot carefully placed to maximize the protection provided to her advancing teammates. Through her scope, she watched Connor moving with the fluid grace of a natural athlete, using cover and concealment to approach the building where the hostages were being held. His progress was steady, but slow, hindered by the concentrated enemy fire that seemed to anticipate his every movement. It was then that Janet realized Tyler's betrayal had been even more comprehensive than she had initially understood. The enemy knew not just their general location and mission objectives, but their specific tactical procedures and individual capabilities. Defensive fire was concentrated exactly where her team members would seek cover, and enemy movements seemed designed to counter their specialized skills. "All stations be advised, the enemy has detailed intelligence on our capabilities," she transmitted. "Adjust tactics accordingly." The warning came just in time to save Kyle's life. As he moved to establish a sniper position on the compound's eastern approach, enemy fire erupted from a location that should have been undefended. Only his instant reaction to Janet's warning allowed him to dive for cover before concentrated machine gun fire shredded the position he had been about to occupy. "Phoenix, this is Bravo 2. Kyle's voice was tight with controlled fear. They knew exactly where I was going to set up. Copy Bravo 2. Stay flexible and trust your instincts over the plan. Janet's mind raced as she calculated the implications of their compromised tactics. Every element of their mission plan had potentially been fed to the enemy, which meant survival would depend on improvisation and adaptability rather than careful preparation. She shifted her own position, abandoning the hide site she had carefully prepared in favor of a less optimal but unpredictable location. If the enemy knew her preferred shooting positions, staying in one place too long would be suicide. The movement saved her life. Seconds after she displaced from her original position, enemy mortar rounds began falling with devastating accuracy. The explosions tore apart the rocky terrain where she had been concealed, sending shrapnel and stone fragments flying in all directions. All stations, Phoenix is relocating, she transmitted while moving to her backup position. Enemy has accurate intelligence on our positions. The battle that followed tested every aspect of their training and pushed their individual skills beyond normal human limitations. Nathan's explosives created confusion and destruction throughout the compound, but enemy forces seemed to anticipate his preferred tactics and respond accordingly. Alex maintained communications with extraction forces while providing tactical coordination, but his transmissions were being jammed by sophisticated electronic warfare equipment that suggested professional military training among their opponents. David's assault team made steady progress toward the hostage location, but each advance was bought with ammunition they couldn't spare and time they didn't have. The enemy's defensive preparations were more extensive than satellite imagery had revealed, and their resistance was far more determined than intelligence estimates had suggested. It was Connor who finally reached the building where the American hostages were being held. "Phoenix, this is Bravo 4, he whispered into his radio. "I have visual on 2 American personnel. They appear to be alive, but restrained." "Copy Bravo 4. What's your assessment for extraction?" "Building is lightly defended, but I count at least 6 hostiles in the immediate area. Gonna need a diversion to get them out safely." Janet understood immediately what Connor was requesting. He needed her to eliminate the guards around the hostage location, which would require shots through windows and doorways at extreme range, while her teammate operated in close proximity to the targets. It was the kind of precision shooting that existed only in the realm of legend, and Janet had built her reputation on turning legends into reality. "Bravo 4, mark your position and prepare for precision fire support," she transmitted. Connor activated an infrared marker that would be visible only through Janet's night vision scope, providing a reference point that would prevent her from accidentally targeting her own team member. The margin for error in what she was about to attempt was measured in inches at a distance of nearly 4 kilometers. Janet settled behind her Barrett for what would be the most challenging sequence of shots in her already legendary career. The targets were partially concealed, moving unpredictably, and located in immediate proximity to both hostages and her own teammate. The first shot took out a guard positioned near the building's main entrance, the heavy bullet punching through the concrete wall and eliminating the threat with devastating finality. The second shot, fired 3 seconds later, removed a sniper positioned in an upper window who had been drawing a bead on Connor's position. Each subsequent shot required split-second timing and impossible accuracy. Janet was no longer just a sniper. She had become a precision instrument of warfare, eliminating threats with mechanical efficiency while Connor moved to secure the hostages. "Bravo 4 to Phoenix." Connor's voice carried a note of awe. "I don't know how you're making these shots, but keep it up. Almost to the hostages." "Copy Bravo 4. Continue your approach." The rescue operation reached its climax when Connor finally reached the room where the American prisoners were being held. Through her scope, Janet could see him working to free the restraints while maintaining security against the remaining guards. But their success was about to be threatened by a development that no amount of planning could have anticipated. "Phoenix, this is Bravo 2, Kyle's voice carried urgent warning. "Multiple vehicles approaching from the south. Looks like reinforcements." Janet immediately shifted her scope to the indicated direction, confirming Kyle's report. With a sinking heart, at least 8 vehicles were approaching the compound at high speed, carrying what appeared to be significant numbers of additional enemy personnel. The tactical mathematics were suddenly impossible. Her reduced team was already engaged against superior numbers, and the arrival of reinforcements would make their situation hopeless. They needed to complete the hostage rescue and begin extraction procedures immediately. "All stations, this is Phoenix," she transmitted. "Emergency extraction protocols are now in effect. Complete your objectives and prepare to move to the extraction point." The final phase of their mission began with Connor successfully freeing both American hostages, who turned out to be the deep cover operatives that intelligence had feared were compromised. Their survival and successful extraction would provide crucial information about enemy operations and prevent classified intelligence from falling into hostile hands. But getting them out would require fighting through an increasingly difficult tactical situation. David's assault team began their withdrawal under intense enemy fire, carrying one of the hostages who had been injured during his captivity. Nathan's remaining explosives were used to create barriers and diversions that would slow enemy pursuit, while Alex coordinated with extraction helicopters that were already en route to their pickup point. Kyle provided overwatch during the withdrawal, his precision rifle eliminating threats that could have overwhelmed the extraction team. His shooting, while not quite at Janet's legendary level, was more than sufficient to keep enemy forces at bay during the critical minutes of their escape. But it was Janet's continued precision fire support that made their extraction possible. From her distant position, she systematically eliminated enemy personnel who posed the greatest threat to her team's withdrawal. Each shot required instant assessment of target priority, range estimation, and environmental compensation, all while her teammates' lives hung in the balance. The approaching reinforcements complicated her calculations exponentially. She now had to divide her attention between supporting the immediate extraction and delaying the arrival of fresh enemy forces who could cut off their escape routes. It was during this phase that Janet made what would later be recognized as the most important decision of her military career. Instead of maintaining her position to provide continued fire support, she made the choice to displace toward the extraction point where her personal skills could provide close protection for the hostages during their most vulnerable moments. The movement required abandoning the elevated position that had provided tactical advantage throughout the mission, but it also allowed her to intercept enemy forces who were attempting to flank her withdrawing team. All stations Phoenix is moving to provide close support during extraction, she transmitted while breaking down her sniper system for movement. The transition from long-range precision shooting to close-quarters combat tested every aspect of Janet's training. Her backup rifle, an SR-25 chambered in 7.62 mm, provided the rapid-fire capability needed for the running battle that developed as they moved toward their pickup point. Connor and Alex carried the injured hostage between them, while David led the assault team in a fighting withdrawal. Kyle provided rear security, his rifle preventing enemy pursuit from overwhelming their movement. Nathan had saved his most devastating explosives for this moment, using them to create choke points and obstacles that would delay enemy forces while his teammates reached safety. The extraction point was a natural clearing approximately 5 kilometers from the compound, chosen for its defensibility and accessibility to the helicopters that would carry them back to friendly territory. But reaching it required crossing open ground that would leave them vulnerable to the superior numbers of their pursuers. It was here that Janet's leadership and tactical expertise proved decisive. Instead of attempting to outrun their pursuers, she positioned her team in a series of defensive positions that would force the enemy to attack uphill against prepared defenses. The tactical advantage gained by superior positioning offset their numerical disadvantage and allowed them to hold the extraction point until air support arrived. "Bravo 6, this is Phoenix," she called to the incoming helicopters. "Landing zone is secure, but we're taking effective fire from multiple directions. Request immediate extraction." "Phoenix, this is Bravo 6. We have visual on your position, coming in fast and low." The sound of approaching helicopters was the most beautiful sound any of them had ever heard. The distinctive whop, whop, whop of rotor blades cutting through desert air announced the arrival of salvation after hours of desperate combat. But the enemy wasn't finished with them yet. As the first helicopter touched down in the extraction zone, enemy forces launched a coordinated assault that nearly overwhelmed the American position. Automatic weapons fire erupted from 3 directions simultaneously, while mortar rounds began falling with dangerous accuracy. Janet's response was immediate and devastating. Using her SR-25 with the kind of precision that had made her legendary, she systematically eliminated the most dangerous threats while directing her team's defensive fire. Each shot was placed with surgical accuracy, turning what should have been an overwhelming enemy assault into a series of individual targets that could be dealt with methodically. "Move, move, move," she shouted as her team began loading the hostages into the waiting aircraft. Connor and Alex got the injured operative aboard first, their movements efficient despite the incoming fire that was tearing up the ground around them. Nathan followed with his remaining explosives, setting final charges that would prevent enemy pursuit during their departure. Kyle maintained overwatch until the last possible moment, his sniper rifle providing the precision fire that kept enemy heads down during the most critical phase of their extraction. David refused to board until every other team member was safely aboard his leadership, extending to personal sacrifice that could have cost him his life. Only Janet's insistence that she would not leave without him convinced the team leader to abandon his position and move to the aircraft. But as they prepared to depart, one final threat emerged that nearly destroyed everything they had accomplished. An enemy rocket-propelled grenade team had maneuvered to within effective range of their helicopter, and Janet could see them preparing to fire the shot that would bring down their extraction aircraft with everyone aboard. Her response was instantaneous and deadly. Without hesitation, she rolled out of the helicopter and took a prone firing position that provided clear lines of sight to the RPG team. Her SR-25 barked 4 times in rapid succession, eliminating all 3 members of the rocket team before they could complete their attack. "Janet, get on board!" David screamed from the helicopter's doorway. But Janet was already moving, sprinting across the open ground that separated her from salvation, while enemy bullets kicked up dust around her feet. The helicopter's crew chief laid down suppressing fire with his door-mounted machine gun, creating a corridor of destruction that allowed Janet to reach the aircraft. She dove through the helicopter's open door as the aircraft lifted off, feeling the aircraft's sudden acceleration as the pilots applied maximum power to escape the engagement zone. Behind them, the terrorist compound burned with the fires that Nathan's explosives had ignited, while enemy forces could only watch helplessly as their primary targets disappeared into the night sky. The mission was complete. Both American hostages had been successfully extracted, along with intelligence materials that would prevent future terrorist attacks. The enemy leadership had been eliminated, their training facilities destroyed, and their operational capabilities severely degraded. But the cost had been significant. Tyler's betrayal had resulted in the compromise of their mission and the loss of tactical surprise. Only Janet's legendary skills and her team's adaptability had prevented total disaster, and even then their success had required pushing human capabilities beyond normal limits. As the helicopter carried them toward friendly territory, Janet found herself reflecting on the thin line that separated success from catastrophe in special operations. A single traitor could doom an entire mission, but the courage and skill of dedicated professionals could overcome even the most desperate circumstances. The injured hostage, now receiving medical treatment from the helicopter's flight medic, was conscious enough to express his gratitude. "Ma'am, I don't know how you did what you did back there, but you saved our lives." "Just doing my job," Janet replied, though she knew that what had transpired went far beyond normal military duties. Connor looked up from checking his equipment for the after-action report that would be required upon their return. "Ma'am, what was the final distance on that first shot?" 3,932 meters, Janet said quietly. The silence that followed was filled with the understanding that they had all participated in something that would be remembered as long as Special Operations Forces existed. Not just because of the tactical success, but because of what it demonstrated about human potential when shaped by training experience and absolute dedication to duty. Kyle shook his head in amazement. "That's a new world record." "Records are just numbers," Janet replied. "What matters is that everyone came home." As they flew through the night towards safety, Janet began planning the reports that would need to be written and the lessons that would need to be learned from their experience. Tyler's betrayal would require a complete review of security procedures, while the tactical successes would be studied and incorporated into future training programs. But perhaps most importantly, the mission had proven that American Special Operations Forces could overcome impossible odds when led by people who refused to accept failure as an option. The war against terrorism would continue, and there would be other missions, other challenges, and other opportunities to serve their country in ways that most citizens would never know about. But for now, they were alive, their mission was complete, and they were going home. 3 months later, Janet stood before a gathering of senior military officials and government leaders in a classified ceremony at the Pentagon. The Medal of Honor she received that day was as much for her team's collective heroism as for her individual achievements, though the citation specifically mentioned extraordinary valor and marksmanship skills that enabled the successful completion of a critical national security mission. The details of Operation Phoenix would remain classified for decades, but The legend of the female sniper who had set a new world record while rescuing American hostages from a terrorist compound in the Sahara Desert would inspire a new generation of special operations personnel. David, Kyle Connor, Nathan, and Alex all received Silver Stars for their roles in the mission, though the full extent of their achievements could not be publicly acknowledged due to security considerations. They had proven that American military training and dedication could overcome any obstacle when applied with intelligence and courage. As for Janet herself, she returned to her quiet life in Montana, officially retired, but always ready to answer her country's call when duty demanded the impossible. Because sometimes being a ghost means disappearing into legend, leaving behind only the proof that miracles can happen when heroes refuse to give up. The Phoenix had risen from the ashes of betrayal and impossible odds to achieve victory against all expectations. And in the process, she had reminded everyone that the most powerful weapon in America's arsenal would always be the courage and skill of the people who volunteered to stand watch in the dark places of the world. The mission was complete, but the legend had only just begun.